Hello, my name is Carlin Kusunoki. I am doing my persuasive speech. Have you ever been on a trip as a minor without your parents? Or would you ever send your kids on a trip if they wanted to go on a trip? When I was a freshman in high school, I went on a trip with several other students with a company called People to People Student Ambassadors. We also was accompanied by 2 students that were from Texas, and 3 chaperones. There was one student that went to the same high school as me, and I didn't know who she was. So basically, I went on a trip with a lot of strangers. Going on the trip, there was some challenges. I had to get both signatures from my parents in order to get my passport. I remember going on the trip and having a huge pit in my stomach because I was very afraid. This was my very first trip by myself, basically. And I knew that, but I knew it was very exciting because I've always dreamt of going to Europe. While traveling as a child, there are some requirements, there are some dangers, and there were a lot of changes being made for minors while traveling. Have you ever watched the movie Home Alone, where this child was constantly being left behind because there were so many children that they forgot about him. And I've always constantly was afraid of something like that happening. There was a few instances where our children were forgotten for a second, and then we would turn around and we'd be like, okay, well, we need to go and make sure that we account for every child that we have with us, including our own. On March 15, 2008, How to Help a Young Child Travel Alone on an Airplane by Trisha Chavez tells us in some cases a minor traveler can fly alone between the ages of 12 and 17 without any restrictions or special services. Now that means that some airlines, there are some paid services that parents can use where the minor children are supervised by attendants. And some of the restrictions are that the flight has to be a one-way with no stops. There are some airlines that charge like $30 for services like these, which leads me to the risks. There have been some risks where some airlines have lost children, which is from an article of 2001. Kids Flying Solo Pose Challenges for Airlines by Terry Maxson reports. In the first case in July, an 11-year-old age girl traveling from Los Angeles had to connect to Phoenix to Detroit. Instead, she was escorted to the gate next door to the Detroit-bound flight and put on a flight to Orlando, Florida. In another article from August 6, 2001, Mishaps May Limit Solo Children Flyers by Laura Ply clarifies that American Airlines, which was responsible for 3 mishaps, announced that effective September 10th, children younger than the age of 12 cannot fly alone on connecting flights. The move comes as the numbers of such unaccompanied minors by some estimates at least 7 million per year. They also show that to minimize some risks, maybe getting on a flight that is not in the late afternoon or the evening, ask for a seat that can be closer to the flight attendants so that the flight attendants can be aware that the child is still there. Get copies of the itinerary. I remember when I went on my trip, we had an itinerary and we were moving from hotel to hotel every like 2 or 3 days. So having that itinerary and knowing when your child is going from one place to the next, you know exactly where they're going and which hotel they're going to. And also getting phone numbers from the chaperones so that you can keep in touch with the students. I remember when I went on my trip, I don't think that most of the chaperones had cell phones, and also at the time when texting was a thing, texting was being charged by the text. I don't think that a lot of the chaperones would have been okay with 30 or some odd number of adults messaging them all the time. Which leads me to the changes. On July 24th, 2001, law changes for children's passports by Jerry J. Gilmore states, under a new law that became effective July 2nd, the State Department now requires both parents' consent to obtain passports and visas for overseas children, travel of children younger than 14. I was around 14 and I did travel around 2001, which is why both of my parents, they had to fill out paperwork regardless of their marital status, whether they be still married, divorced, or separated. Both parties need to sign documentation for the child to participate in any of the trips. In conclusion, traveling does not need to be scary. Yes, there are some risks when sending your children out into the world, but there are several different ways that you can prepare your children so that it's less scary. Getting them a phone card or a prepaid phone for temporary use, getting them a built-in wallet because there are pickpocketers in different countries and they will steal from the very vulnerable. Discuss the itinerary with the child. Get them to be familiar with their flights so that they know exactly where they need to be if they get lost. And that way that the child will not be nervous.